What is up, guys? Welcome to the first video in the new studio. As you can tell if you watch the video where I introed this place, I have given it a fresh lick of paint. It's looking pretty good. I've had a fresh trim and I'm ready to talk all about one of the most important things that you can use to color grade your videos, and that is the lumetri scopes in Premiere Pro. Now, I know for a lot of people, the lumetri scopes in Premiere Pro can be really daunting. And sometimes they can even give you a real case of what I like to call but not to panic. I am going to guide you through that scope phobia. And today we're going to take them nice and easy, one at a time. And I'm going to explain to you what all those weird waveforms mean. We're going to cover what all those blue, green, and red splodges are, and how you can use them to your advantage when color grading your videos. Before I can explain any of those scopes to you, there are three keywords that you need to have a rough understanding of. Those are hue, saturation, and luminance. First up is hue. Hue can essentially be boiled down to the names that we give to colors. So for example, this wall is blue. Those plants behind me are green, and this hard drive has an orange hue. Next up is saturation. If hue refers to the color itself, as in blue or red or green or orange, saturation refers to the intensity of that color. Pure green being the purest or most saturated version of green. As the saturation of a video or an image file increase, the colors appear to be more pure or more true or closer to their base value of that pure red, green, or blue. And as the saturation decreases, things start to look a little bit washed out. If you remove the saturation from the image or video entirely, you're left with one of those old-timey black and white movies. All you're missing is the subtitles. Hue and saturation make up the chrominance values of your image, and that leaves you with luma. That's primarily dictated by your luminance values, which are measured from 0 to 255. 0 being absolute black, 255 being absolute white, and everything in between being everything in between. If you've ever taken a photograph on a camera with a histogram, or you've imported something into Lightroom, or you've imported something into Photoshop, and you've seen that histogram, that's essentially a visual representation of the luminance values in your image from 0 to 255. I know that might sound a little bit kind of out there at the moment, but it'll make a bit more sense when we get onto some of the waveforms in a little bit. So with that out of the way, let's jump into some of these scopes, starting with this, the vector scope. The primary function of the vector scope is to show you that your hue and saturation values are where you think they are. It's made up a lot like the color wheel. If you've ever seen the color wheel before, I'm sure most of you have, unless you've been living under a rock. With red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow indicators all around the outside. When you have the vector scope open and you adjust the hue of an image, you'll notice that everything kind of rotates around. That's because the hue, much like on the color wheel, is shown in a circular pattern. So if you change blue to red, things are gonna shift. The other thing you'll notice when you're using the vector scope is that if you adjust the saturation and you increase it, everything will expand outwards. And if you decrease it, everything will kind of shrink inwards. If you hit absolute black and white, then it'll just be a tiny little dot right in the middle, which means you have no color in your image, none whatsoever. The different color boxes around the outside are there for video engineers when they need to check that their colors are calibrated properly and are within the legal broadcast limits. For YouTube, it's not gonna matter so much. That said, there is one really useful tool that we haven't actually talked about yet that's hidden in the vector scope, and that is the skin tone line. What the skin tone line is basically a line that dictates roughly where your skin tones should sit. For example, in Adobe Premiere, if you were to make a mask and mask around my face right now, you'd see that the colors would sit nicely in and around that line. They don't have to sit exactly on that line, but it's just a good guide to be within a few degrees. As I mentioned earlier, if you've ever used a semi-modern camera, you've probably seen a histogram. It's the thing with all the lines that kind of does this. That's that one. That's that one. In Premiere, it looks a little bit different because it's turned 90 degrees and it's on its side, but it essentially does the exact same thing. The histogram reads the brightness and tonal values of the image, specifically the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the histogram goes from 0 or pure black all the way up to 255 or pure white. Also in Premiere Pro, it gives you the overall tonal levels, which in this case is the gray, as well as the individual split for the red, green, and blue channels. If, like most filmmakers are most of the time, you're trying to keep all of that data in the image, you kind of want to make sure that everything is between those two values. Anything over 255 is blown out and the data will be lost, and anything below 0 is gone too. You're not getting it back. It's done. So anytime you're making any adjustments to any of the individual channels, say you're messing with the RGB curves and you're not using the overall curve, you're using one of the individual ones, the histogram is the tool I would recommend going for. Moving on from the histogram, we have the waveform. Now, the waveform measures both the brightness or luminance value of an image and the chrominance or color value of an image, depending on which version of the waveform you choose. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, well, how is that any different to the histogram, Mason? You just told us about the histogram and it does that kind of thing. And you'd be right. But the waveform does this in a really interesting way. The waveform essentially maps out the image as it is shown to you, but in terms of the color or the luminance values. For example, if I were to hold this white balance card in front of my face, essentially what you would see on the waveform is this square, but in waveform. Essentially, what I'm getting at is that the waveform, unlike the histogram, maps the location of each pixel along with its luminance value and its color value, again, depending on which waveform that you choose. Also, unlike the histogram, it doesn't measure stuff from 0 to 255. It measures stuff from 0 to 100, and it does this in IRE. Now, this is a different scale that's used for measuring composite video signals, and IRE stands for the Institute of Radio Engineers. And what that is an institute of people a whole lot smarter than me who basically dictated how you measure video signals through, I don't know. They're smart, okay? If you want to know, you're gonna have to go and just knock on the door of the Institute of Radio Engineers and ask, I guess. Just be like, hey, or you can go on Wikipedia, that works too, probably. Regardless of all of that, there are 4 different waveforms for you to choose from in Premiere Pro. There is the RGB waveform, which shows, as you'd imagine, the RGB values mapped out across the image by pixel. My personal favorite, which is the Luma waveform. I use this a lot for dictating my shadows, highlights, midtones, and all that kind of stuff. What that does is displays the brightness and the contrast value of your image. The third option is the YC waveform, which displays your chrominance and your luminance. And the last option is the YC with no chroma, which, as the name would dictate, displays just the luminance with no chrominance values. If you're looking for a really good way to learn the IRE system without going into that whole rabbit hole of learning about video signals and that kind of thing, a really, really great resource is the Ansel Adams zoning system. If you Google it, you'll find a whole wealth of knowledge. That system is measured from 1 to 10, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but basically treat each 1 as a 10 on the IRE scale, and it gives you a pretty good approximation of where things should be. And just like that, we have made it to the final scope in Premiere Pro, the Parade. Now, if you have made it this far, go ahead, drop the video a big old thumbs up, give it a like if you did like it, subscribe if you have not already, and also check out some of the links down below. There's links to my social media accounts. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and also a link to my Patreon account if you do want to check that out and support what I'm doing on this channel. It would be much appreciated. And with that said, back into the Parade. Now, much like the waveform, the Parade comes with a whole bunch of different options. I'm not going to do a deep dive on these purely on the basis that 99% of the time, you're going to use the RGB Parade. I said it. It might be an unpopular opinion. You might be there using the YUV Parade and just wanting to punch through your computer monitor, but I said it, it's too late. The RGB Parade is essentially just like the waveform monitor, except if you took all that information and squished it down and then basically laid it out across 3 separate scopes within one scope for the red, green, and blue channels, that's what you're looking at. It sounds super complicated, but if you pull it up and you have a look at it and you have a play around with it, which is what I'd recommend you do for all of these, you'll soon figure out that it is the exact same thing, but with the individual color channels just split out. put side by side. Basically, what you want to do is keep your values within 0 to 100. And it's great if you're trying to white balance stuff, or you've got a white card like this and you just grab a mask from this. Make sure that all of those RGBs, I said RGBs. Make sure all of those RGB values are level, and then you'll know that you have absolutely perfectly nailed your white balance. And just like that, we have looked at all of the scopes in Premiere Pro. Well, I skipped out a few on the parade there, but for the most part, we've looked at all the ones that you are going to come across or you're going to need to use when you're color grading your projects. The last thing that I do want to add is always remember to use the scope in conjunction with your own eyes. If you balance something up and it looks perfect on the scope, and then you look at it and you're like, that person looks like they have green skin, or they look like they have jaundice. Is that a thing? Is that when you have the like yellow in your skin because your kidneys or something? I don't know. I'm not a doctor. All I'm saying is that if something looks like it's right in the scopes, always use a sense check. Just look at it and make sure it looks right to your eye. There's nothing worse than delivering like a client project and, like I say, someone has green skin. They're not going to be pleased. Not even a little bit. I've never done it, but if I was paying, I would not be impressed. So as I mentioned a moment ago, I'm going to wrap things up there. Go ahead, like, subscribe, leave comments, click all the buttons. If you've got any questions, drop them down in the comments. I will try and answer as many as I can. Take it easy, and I will see you in the next video. I guess it might be a studio build-out video. I've got some exciting things to share. I'm pretty hyped. All right, see you guys in the next one. Peace!